Hey, this is Ocular Cavity back again with another art tip video. I'm here because I was doing a hair video for TR to Silver, but he's been having trouble shading the last couple days, so I really need to do this one first because it's a quick video, it's a quick problem, and he's struggling with something that is art app settings problem, not a technique problem. So we're gonna go watch this clip real quick. If you can go over and watch it on his channel. I'm just going to do a quick one through so you can see the kind of problems he was struggling with. He's trying to get shading, kind of a smooth shading in between things, and it is challenging, but it's not as challenging as what he's trying to do here, where he's basically trying to do each color separately, and that's something that you shouldn't necessarily have to put up with the app. But in digital drawing, it's very easy to end up get stuck with not knowing which settings to use and all that, because every app is everybody's first time at some point. So one of the things you can do, and this is basically what this video is going to be, is showing how if you are trying to do some kind of simple shading like he was doing, black and white shading, nothing too complicated, and you want it to look smooth, some of the basic things you can do to get that. So I'm going to go into the pen and show you what by default, if I'm using a solid G pen, because I just mostly use the basic G pen. The G pen is one of the most basic pen brush styles in any of these apps. They usually have a G pen or something similar. It's basically just a black line. And if you make it bigger, it's basically just a round, fat black line that gets thicker as you draw with it. Now, sure, if you wanted to draw something, you could, let's draw a circle, and then you could try going into the color wheel and lightening it up each time you want to add a darker shade to it, and then just keep going darker and darker. But that would take you forever, and you're not doing this in color, so you don't need to do all that. So we're going to get rid of that. So the best thing you can do, and this is, I'm going to make this a bit bigger so you guys can see it. You want to go into your brush settings. Now every program is going to have this in a different area, but you need to tweak some of these settings. Now these are the settings that are most important. So I usually have them for each brush. You can change which ones are visible or whatever, but these are the ones that are most important for what we're talking about: opacity and brush density. Now they both do something different, but normally this brush is just black. No matter how hard I press, no matter how light I press, it just gets skinnier. It doesn't get lighter or darker. So if you want this brush to get lighter or darker, you can change opacity, and then you can change it to pen pressure. Now, not every app will let you do this, but if you need this and your app doesn't do it, it might be time to find another app, because for me, this is like a big deal. All the apps I use let me do this. So it starts off faded and light, and then the harder I press, the darker it gets. Now you can pick the maximum threshold for this. Now what's funny is that normally this will go straight to black, but that's about as dark as I can get it for some reason on here. For some reason the maximum threshold seems to be, oh yeah, that's why. See that? This needs to be up there. There we go. So yeah, you got to make sure your thresholds are maxed out, so that way you can go pretty much close to black. I don't want to mesh my nib because it's felt, so I'm not going to go to 100% black. But that gives you the basic idea. So you can go from light to darker to darker to darker to darker to darker to darker, and that's just with pen pressure. And then there's also, you can change that, turn that off. We can also go to brush density. Now brush density also does something very similar, where as you start light, it gets lighter and then it gets darker. But one of the things about brush density that's different than opacity is it's more or less turning this into like a spray can. Now what's funny is that normally you get more variation with this. It could be because this is the Android version, but usually we can tweak this one. I normally don't leave any of these at 100%. Usually if I'm doing a shading brush, the minimum I do it down to 75%, and then come on, come on, 50%. Yeah, I think the desktop app does this better. Let's get rid of the size variation, just so that we don't have to. We'll get rid of the tilt, and let's get rid of the pressure. There we go. And so now it's just going to get darker. There we go. This is a little easier. For some reason, maybe it was the tilt that was getting in the way. Let's try it again. Yeah, it's a little better. Your brushes will vary based on the app and based on the program. The desktop version, I get more responsiveness out of the density. Let's turn off. We're just going to turn off the size pressure altogether. But yet, playing with these settings makes a huge difference. So when you shade with this one, the lighter you are and the heavier you are, it gets darker. Now, even though it seems similar to opacity, they have two very big differences. If you, here we go, turn this, if we turn the density on, if you draw a light gray line, it's light gray. Now, if you draw over it, it gets darker. But it'll get darker no matter when you cross it. So even if you're in the middle of the same line, it gets darker and darker and darker every time you cross it until it reaches black. Now, if you let's disable that, we're going to turn that off, and we're going to turn it back up to 100%. We're going to go to opacity, turn that up to pressure. Now, the difference with opacity, if you do a light and you cross the same line, it doesn't get any darker until you let go of the pen, bring it back down. So each time you bring it, you let go, I'm taking it up, putting it down, taking it up, putting it down, taking it up, putting it down. Each time you lift and you put it back down, it adds another layer of darkness. So if you want to better control your shading, this kind of like a cheat mode. So you can lay out a whole area of color, and if you can keep your pressure pretty consistent, it'll stay pretty consistent. Now you can also pick a maximum level. So in my case, I usually do something like 50% for opacity. That way, it'll only ever get like maybe this dark, and then you could just add more layers to make it darker. Especially when I'm drawing, I'll use a real light opacity setting like that. And so now that you've got these as options, I'm going to reset this all back to default because this brush, when in my program, I like this brush to just be black. But I have a brush that I already kind of use for this kind of thing, and I don't need this brush to do it. Okay, everything's back to normal again, right? Ah, oh, crap, I accidentally closed my window. No, that's the wrong one. Crap, that's the fun part is when you accidentally screw up your setup. There we go. Let's make this tiny again. And we're going to put it back where it belongs. Still a little short. Come on. Sorry about the delay. There we go. Move that back. So now that we've got, in this brush here, this is the brush I tend to use to draw most of the time. This one, let's see, we're going to go to, we've got a bunch of the settings already preset. I've got the opacity at 100, but it's pressure sensitivity. And did I set the density? This one, I didn't set the density. Okay, so this one, you can draw light, and then the harder I press, the darker it gets. This one probably could use that pressure gauge to be sent all the way up to the top. There we go. That's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be. Now, if you're going to be shading with this, just like he was doing, you draw, let's say you draw a circle. We're going to draw just a real basic circle. Nothing crazy. Because this doesn't need to be good. This just needs to show what you can do. And you want to shade the bottom half of it. So you can actually start. You need it bigger. You need it bigger. And then as you feel like it, you can add more and more layers to it to make it darker. And I have a natural tendency to lift my pen at the end of every darkening stroke, so that's why opacity isn't that big of a deal for me, because I tend to lift it. If you are used to shading traditionally and you don't lift your pen a lot, sometimes it can be easier to just keep the pen down and keep going over the same areas over and over again. There are times I do that when I'm shading large areas with a real pencil, analog pencil. Now, once you get down to where you've got a decent amount of gradient, you can find a smudge tool. This is the second tool that is really handy to have, like a blend tool. This one I downloaded a custom one, but I think this is the blend tool. You can then you make it a decent size, and you can use this to kind of smooth. If you were doing this with analog art, you'd be using your finger or a piece of paper to add smoothing, and then you can go back to the pen tool, add some more darkness around the edges. Now this is a really simple basic form of tone blending, and this is the basic vanilla tool that comes in the program, so it's nothing super special or anything. And then you go back to the blending tool and you just give it a bit more of a smudge, and you can change the size of the blending area so that you're not blending quite so far, and then you can end up with some shading. Now this is really quick, this is really dirty, this is nothing special. Now usually if I was drawing, like, let's say an eye, I don't even usually end up needing to use the blending tool quite so much. So let's find a new spot. We're gonna switch to the pen. We're gonna move this over a bit so I can get the center of my screen right, and go back to the G pen. We're gonna pick something smaller, maybe like 25. We'll just do a tiny little eye in the corner somewhere. It's not going to be the best eye, but this will just be an eyeball for practice so that we can have an excuse to shade something the way I'd normally do it. Add a couple of little lashes on there just to give it. I think I maybe need to make my brush just a tad smaller. Let's go down to 12. And each time I lift my brush, it gives an extra little layer. My eraser's too small. Me need a bigger eraser. Eraser, we're going to go 25 for the eraser. Yeah, that's better. And then you can use the eraser to kind of change things up as you go. I'm going to need a new nib. My nib's starting to wear out. Getting lopsided. This is sloppy, but you kind of get the basic idea. Here we go. So we're going to draw the iris. Let's get a nice good line in there. All right, there we go. So we're going to give just a bit of shine in the corner, a little opposing shine in the opposite side, and then we're going to draw the pupil in the center. Now this is kind of how I've always shaded, because a lot of times I shade with pencil in real life. So a lot of times I do little circles, and I usually lift, and because I'm doing this digitally and I need these to overlap some, I lift my pencil just a hair in each of them. Depending on what I'm shading determines on the pattern I use, because the pattern you shade with kind of gives you a certain kind of texture, and the more you add to it, it kind of gives a certain kind of impression. The fact that the iris is a circle makes me tend to lean more towards circly shapes to shade with, and all of this is me swirling and adding pressure and lifting it occasionally to get that reset of the opacity sensor so that it resenses the, I'm doing a new layer of shading on top of it. And I usually make a good deal of effort along the outside lining of it so that it gives you a much bigger defined edge. And the more you, once you've gotten a few layers of spirals, you can do a little bit of zigzaggy lefts and rights, whatever it is that suits your fancy. Now, normally I'd probably use a bigger brush setting than this, but you know that'll do it. Let's give it a little bit of darkness around the side. Now we're going to add the upper shadow around the top of the eye. This is the bit that's kind of being overshadowed by the eyelid itself, so this area needs to be pretty dark. Not as dark as the pupil itself, but pretty dark. And you want to make sure that if you are using any border lines to kind of get an idea of where you need to shade, you kind of want to fade them out a bit so they don't look so obvious. Same with this area. We want a nice dark black outline. That will give the eye a lot more definition. Oh, kind of messed that one up a bit. And same with the pupil. You want to have a nice black transition into the pupil zone. And basically shading, a lot of times when you're shading like this, is adding layer upon layer upon layer of tone, just making it darker and darker and darker and darker. It does take a bit of time, you know, like he was saying in the video when you watch the full version of it, he was saying that it does this, just shading just takes a long time, and it does take a decent amount of time. It doesn't have to take forever though. And with this, all I'm doing is varying the pressure and adding layers one layer at a time. I'm not doing anything exotic. I'm not changing colors every couple of seconds. All I'm doing is adding layer after layer after layer of pressure to each line and just making it darker and darker and darker until you end up with whatever the tone is that you're looking for. And so we're adding something there. I think at this point I probably need to make my eraser a bit smaller. We're going to go for 12, the same size as the pencil. We're going to darken up this area at the top. Now you notice I haven't even started using the smudge tool yet, because a lot of times you kind of don't have to. If you're got a good handle on what you're doing, you can use the smudge tool to get things really super, super, super fine. But if you get good handle on your hand pressure and controlling how hard and how often you go over the same area, you can kind of make your own gradients. And then if you want to use the smudger at the end to get a real smooth, super soft, kind of like satin finish to things, you can do that. Now this is also zoomed in quite a bit, because the work I'm doing here, a lot of times if you're looking at a character, you may not even necessarily straight see any of these lines I'm making, any of the hashing patterns or anything. We're just going to slowly keep adding. We want a little bit of shadow along the bottom, because this part of the eye is also going to be recessed. So it's going to be kind of like going downhill. So any area that's going downhill, you want shadow to show it. Same with going towards the pupil itself. That area is also downhill, so you're going to want to make sure there's some shading along the outside of that, because it's sloping down before it starts getting black dark. The reason the pupil itself is dark is because it's a hole in the eye that lets the light in. So any light that comes in does not come back out, and that's why it's dark, is because you're unable to see anything that doesn't have light bouncing off of it. And the inside of the eye doesn't have light bouncing off of it because it's being absorbed by the eye itself. So let's shade this area a little bit more. I feel like this area needs a bit more separation in some air on the outside and a bit closer on the inside. Okay, let's darken this up some more. This is a little bit too light, so let's add a little bit more darkness to it. we go. And once you zoom out, your eye can't really tell a lot of the separation between the shade and where you've left it. So you don't have to be as clean as that. And then we're going to do a little bit of cross shading that starts dark and then lightens up as it goes down. Starts dark up here and then lightens up as it goes down. And that gives a nice little gradient to it, because your eye, when you're looking at this kind of a thing after it's been drawing, your eye kind of just takes the average. It doesn't really notice that there's lines and light and gaps and all that. Your brain doesn't really see that when you're glancing at this from a distance. So you can kind of use all of these little lighting tricks to make shading look shady. And this is what I used to do with just pencil. After, get a little bit of lines in here, just a little bit of light hashing, a little bit of a light gray around the bottom shine. And this is kind of like my traditional basic eye. Sometimes you do, for different characters, you'll use different kinds of eye shine patterns or whatever just to give them their own kind of unique flavor. This is like the most basic of basic shine patterns that I use for a lot of my characters, so it's not anything fancy or special. It'll give you an idea of what we're doing here. It's darken this bit up a bit just to make it stand out. Now, the smaller the eye is, whenever you're drawing it in the actual picture, you don't have to go into this much detail to make every eye because you'd be at it for years. But this would be something where the character's face is relatively big. So then when you zoom back out, there's a natural, looks like a natural shade to this. And that's just at a glance. Now, if you were unhappy with that level of definition, we're going to just copy this just so that we don't, just in case we ruin it. And we're going to go copy and paste. That moves it to a new layer, so we can get rid of that one. Get rid of the tool, close that. Now we can take the smudging tool that we were using earlier, and we can blend some of this a bit. And then we'll probably want to tighten up some of it as we go in certain areas. After we've done some smudging, we'll tighten up the areas that need to be defined. This probably needs to be made a bit smaller. The smudging tool's a bit too big right now for some of the details I'm going to do. Let's bring it down to 12. And we're going to smudge, because some of the dark areas, when there's dark and light within the smudge, it'll kind of decide for itself what it wants to do. And that's the tricky thing about smudging with a non-analog tool. Now we're going to go back and we're going to tighten up the areas that need to be dark. Now, personally, for things like this, I don't think the smudging tool is the right choice, because you can get just as much, if not more, control out of your actual regular hand and drawing tools. You don't necessarily need the smudging tool to help you, but there's a certain kind of look you get with the smudging tool that's pretty cool. And if you're going for that look, the smudging tool is kind of the way to go. If you were using, a real pencil and pen, an analog pencil and pen, you could do that with these little paper, kind of like, they look like pencils, but they're made out of paper. You can use one of those to get it. See, like, look at that. And we're going to give it a little bit more definition around the edges to help counteract some of the softing that we got from the smudging tool. Clean up the edges just a bit. My nib is almost done. It's like rotating. I can feel the lopsided. It's flat on one side and it's twisting as I'm drawing with it. It's really unpleasant. There we go. And that gives you a much more smoother, soft blend. It looks cool, and it looks cool in its own way. Doesn't look the same as the other one, but see if we go back, we'll make both of them visible. And then, actually, we should probably do, let's go back to this one. Let's move it so that we can tell more regularly. Huh? There we go. Yeah, somehow that square got really derpy. We'll move it and we'll make the old one visible again. Yes. What? Oh, it moved the whole canvas for realsy. Come on, Clip. Don't be like that. The whole reason I moved it is so that I wouldn't have to have the two eyes layered on top of each other. All right, well, we're going to cancel that. We're going to make a new square, and we're just going to freaking move it. Hello? Square, please. Yeah, my nib's definitely wearing out. It didn't respond to me when I clicked on it. We're just going to move you over to the side here. Like there. And then we're going to bring back the old one. Yes. Bring back the old one, please. Oh, you moved both of them again? Come on. Oh, dear. Now, this is one of those things. That's maybe we can. There's probably a reference layer thing that I'm missing here that's making this hard. Let's cancel that one. We are going to make this the reference layer, maybe? I think if you make it the reference layer, that should fix this, because I'm still learning this app, so there's a lot of things I don't know. And if you guys know what my problem is, usually I don't have a problem with it moving the page underneath. Cancel. Let's hit OK first, and then let's try to move the. There we go. Yeah, get rid of that reference layer thing. We don't need that anymore. Okay. So now we can move this around and get them right close to each other. Now you can see they're the same eye, the same drawing, but now they have a different impression. And the further they are away, it gives you a different impression too. At the distance, the one eye with the smoothing looks softer, but it also looks a little cloudy. Like this would be, how they used to use the soft screen in the old black and white movies. That's kind of what the eye on the right is looking like. Where the other one looks like whoever it is clear and focused, and like they look like they're seeing really well, and their eyes are not being clouded by judgment or anything like that. It's kind of like gives you an impression, and so that's the kind of differences you can get between hand shading and using a smudge tool to soft shade. And so we'll probably leave those two eyeballs there, as I'll probably use them for the thumbnail when I print this. And maybe I'll leave this circle in there too. We'll see. I'll figure out what I want to do with this. And let's go back to the circle, because the circle is a very basic three-dimensional shape. Ooh, somehow I lost my color shade. That's one of those things that can happen if you're not careful. You can accidentally brush into that and kind of change your color offset, and you didn't kind of mean to. Let's go back to this other layer, and we'll darken up. Oh, wrong tool. Tool, please. There we go. G pen. G pen. There we go. And we can add some kind of darkness to the outside edge of this. Let's make the brush a bit bigger, because for the eye detail, 12 was good. Let's give it a little bit darker. And when you have a blacker outer edge like this to go to, you get the smudging tool small enough so that it's not picking up the white past the black line you're using. You can kind of get a more satisfactory blend. There we go. Let's add maybe just a hair bit more thickness to this bottom line. Just a hair more thickness, not much. Let's back that up just a bit. That was a little bit too thick there. Then we're going to go back to the blender, smudging tool, and see, like as you blend inward, it'll bring some of the darkness out. Now it brings it in a lot more concentrated manner the more you go around and the smaller the tool is, but once you've gotten the amount of shadow you want blended in from the edge, you can go over it with a bigger one and smooth it out and soften it up more. So right now it's still kind of dark and smudgy and gross, but we can just keep on going. Now this is a time-consuming thing to do. Blending and shading kind of always is, but it's better than trying to pick colors one at a time. So let's go, we'll make the blender a bit bigger. Let's make it up to 25. And then we'll use the 25 to smooth out the edges of where I just blended. And then we'll further smooth out the dark areas. You want to go, if you want an area to get darker, you have to go from the dark area to the light area. And if you want an area to get lighter, you got to go from the light area to the dark area. So like right here, I went in the wrong direction and it messed up the shading. So I've got to go back to a smaller tool and then blend it outward. Let's see, go back to 25 and go back to the blender. And then we're going to blend that in. And then what you've got in the kind of general tonal shade you want, then you can probably go over it with one kind of bigger pass. Maybe try 50. And the 50 just kind of, just go sideways. And it kind of evens out the tones just a hair. And you can be light with this. The lighter you are with the smudge tool does make it. There's some kind of pressure sensitivity to it. And we're just going to smudge it out. And then you slowly work your way out to where the page is actually white. Maybe use a little eraser to make the page just a bit whiter. There you go. Not the perfect blend, but good enough for an example. Gives you some shading, some example of what I'm doing. And the more you feel like playing with it, the better you can get this blending thing to work. This is all a matter of how much time are you willing to put in this and how much effort. But there's plenty. It's almost like clay where you're slowly molding the shape into what you want. There we go. Also, changing the size for me helps because it helps my whatever, accuracy or control I have with my hand, it's affecting that. Alrighty. It kind of looks like a weird golf ball, but you guys get the basic idea. So that's kind of how you want to use your tools. If you're doing black and white shading and you just kind of want to get quicker and easier blend, I mean, this video took what, like 30 minutes. So this was 30 minutes worth of shading. I did two eyes and I did this circle. So that gives you an idea of how long this can take. And of course, we can go deeper into all of these. All of these, if I had chosen to do more, you can get a lot more layers of shade with something than this. And that's, part of what's cool about the shading is like you can go as deep as you want, or you can go as shallow as you want. Just some hash lines and some scribbles can get you here. And then if you want to start using a light smudging tool after you've done that, you can get there. And if you want to go hog wild, you could get something like that or better. If you you guys might do better than me. Anyway, this is, for TR to Silver. If you guys get a chance, go check out his channel. He's learning how to draw and send him any good, helpful hints you can. And, be nice and be supportive. No negativity is needed here. All right, everybody, be nice to each other and keep drawing.